Welcome to the latest episode of Beer Chai and Future, guys. I don't even remember which episode it is.
Six, maybe? Five,
Wait.
six?
Yes, thanks, okay. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Mike, what are we talking about
Today, we're going to talk about implementation of new software platforms. A lot of the questions that we get when we're at conferences and talking to different people is, well, how did you do that? How did you bring that into your company? It's really cool, but how did you get it into your company? So we just thought it was a good topic to talk about.
Absolutely. We talk about the future, but a lot of the future is technology that is in the present and changing our current processes using that. And different companies have like wide range of experiences on how they do it, depending on how big they are, what kind of history they have with existing technology. Remember that concept we talk about like with levels in different landscaping company, and the experience like just changes based on what the companies are going through. And we want to cover some basics here that you can just like pick off the shelf and deploy. All right, so let's dive into it. Mike, I think there's no better place to start than how you guys do stuff at Level Green. So yeah, what's the approach you take? Like just
I think the most important piece to it is finding a champion before you do anything. Let's say that you've already decided that you're going to implement the software, because that's a whole nother conversation on how do you get to, oh, I want to actually implement this software. So let's just, for the sake of this conversation, say that you've already determined what you're going to implement. It's really important to pick a champion, somebody who is going to own that process from beginning to end. And I think the other really important detail to point out at the very beginning is the end is not once the software has been implemented. The end is 1 or 2 years after the software has been implemented, and a true process shift and mind shift has actually taken place.
good point. So champion, what does a champion look like? Like how do you find champions in your like something special
Oh,
about
that's a
them?
good question. I mean, I think the most important piece to a champion is passion. And then the second most important piece is time. If you try to force somebody to be a champion, then on top of an already overloaded workload, then you're not going to get the results that you're looking for. I think it's
Yeah.
really important to pick somebody who wants to do it. And I think that within every company, there's somebody who wants to do this if they've been given the opportunity. So that doesn't necessarily have to be a high level manager. It could be a mid level manager or a lower level manager that is just going to take ownership of the property. And then again, I think the other piece is time. If somebody is already working 60 hours a week just to get their normal workload done, you can't pile this on top of them, because it really
Mm,
needs a lot of focus and a lot of attention so that things can get set up correctly. And then I think the last piece to this is the person has to be a decent trainer, because they're going to be championing this process, and they don't have to train everyone. And in fact, they should not train everyone in the company, but they should be able to train trainers so that they start
yes.
with 3 or 4 people, then those 3 or 4 people teach 3 or 4 other people, and then exponentially you cover everything in the
Grows.
company.
100%. I think when you talk about ownership, there's this piece about like believing in doing this thing is the right thing to do for the company. And so if you are like sitting in those meetings, or maybe that guy has at some point said, why don't we do it like this? It would be better. And so that's a sign for you that for some opportunity in the future, that guy could be a champion. There would be young guys who can and simply implement it, pick it up, implement it, try it out on their phones, and like do something about it. Like they're just like in that habit. So maybe when you're looking out for champions, you don't remember someone that said something in a boardroom one day. Then look out for those younger guys who can simply pick up and start running with it. And all well, I say younger guys, it's really young at heart. It's not exactly like they shouldn't have gray hair.
No, I mean that's a great point. You're right. They just have to understand technology and have a passion for technology, because that's what we're essentially talking about implementing our new software platforms, or even with robotics. I mean, it's just new technology. So it can't be the person. I mean, even if you have a 20-year-old that thinks that doing stuff on paper is the best way to do it, all right, they're not your champion.
100%. And then there's this optimism that they should have that things can get better, because a lot of times people are like, oh, they would see why it would not work instead of seeing why it would work. And you want the second one so that it moves forward.
That's a great point. I think that's an often overlooked aspect of passion is optimism. And so I think it's great that you called it out separately, because part of being passionate, I think, is being optimistic that what you're doing is actually a change for the better. But there's a lot of naysayers about change. And so someone that sees that, oh, this might be difficult, but the payoff is going to be worth it.
100%. And the thing is, implementation is painful, right? If that optimism doesn't exist, once you actually get into the weeds of doing it, it starts hurting. People are gonna bail, man. You don't want that to happen. So that really is like the band-aid that prevents that from happening.
That's another great point, is that once you start implementing, the excitement around the change kind of leaves, because there's a ton of boring, tedious admin work that needs to be done, right? You really do have to grind it out for a month, 3 months, depending on what you're implementing. The implementation process may be longer. And listen, a lot of these platforms have come a long way in the last couple of years, and there are ways to speed up some of the tedious data cleaning that needs to happen and data uploads. But that part of it, even though it's tedious, is so important. And I think this brings up another trait of your champion that you need: somebody who's detail oriented, because there's a lot of data that needs to be looked at, and it needs to be formatted correctly and put into the right column so that it can be uploaded. So somebody who's detail oriented is another good trait.
100%. When you say detail oriented, it also means being able to document a process, like, okay, this is how I did it, this is how you can pick it up and implement it in your workflow, sort of to your trainer's point, but in a more structured fashion.
So I think that's another excellent point, and something that most companies, including our own, kind of overlooked during implementation, is documenting those processes, because there's so much focus on just getting the implementation done. There's not a lot of focus on documenting how that was done, so that if it needs to be redone or rechecked or updated, there's a process to follow, because that person who did the implementation might not be there. And so you should document. And I think that's one of the things that we could have done better with while we were implementing software, is just documenting changing training processes, but also how standard operating procedures change because of the implementation.
Because of 100%. So like there's this before and after thing that you got to document. So let's say you were a simple process of, give me an example. Let's say scheduling, right? So you used to get a job, then you would put that on the board, you would write out the ticket, you would hand it over to the crew, and then they go off and do it. There are like schedules for every day. Then the week changes. Maybe it rains one day, it gets messed up. And so that's how it used to happen, right? Like now that's a process. This is what you used to do. It's a literal like one step after the other that's happening. But now it's changed because you're implementing a new software. Now, what does the new process look like? Because there's a software in picture. People need to see that.
Yeah, and I think especially with implementation in larger companies, you're just trying to get through implementation so that you're stay up and running, because that's another piece to implementation. You don't stop your business to implement a new software and say, all right, let's everyone take a break for the next 2 to 3 months. We're just going to stop mowing grass or stop servicing clients while we learn how to work in this system. All of your employees need to continue to produce the work and continue to produce enhancement proposals to generate additional revenue. And so they have to immediately jump into the system. And so when everybody's kind of learning at the same time, you're putting out a lot of fires. And when you're putting out fires, you're not thinking about the future. You're not planning. You're not putting training documentation into place. And then once you get through implementation, if you didn't do it while you were in implementation, the mindset is, well, now everyone knows how to do it. So there's no sense in wasting the time to go back and document things. But it's
100%.
so important, right? Because new people come on board
all the time. And the implementation often happens in a very targeted fashion. Oh, I'm going to get this done by the end of the next 3 months. And then like the next 3 months pass, and now you're like, okay, let's look at how much we have done. Okay, we have done it like 80%. All right, cool. And then you move on. But hey, did that thing become sticky? If it didn't stick, it didn't really get implemented, and it won't stick until like the behaviors change. It gets like and becomes scalable to a point where the organization just operates out of it, like from that space. And so, like you said, an old guy leaves, a new person comes in. That's exactly where they will start from, because as part of their KT, when they join the team, it's like, oh, you know what? We use this tool when you send out a proposal. Don't freaking even think about using anything else. That's our thing.
Yep. Yeah.
It's just like how deeply did that thing penetrate into the organization system is like critical to a successful implementation.
For sure. And I love the idea of that stickiness, because a lot of times people say, oh, the software failed, or the software didn't reach our expectations, or it didn't do what they told us we could do. All right, that's maybe 5 or 10% of the time. The other 90% of the time, the software didn't fail. The implementation failed. If you don't get to that point of stickiness where it is the new normal and the only accepted way of doing things, then it's the implementation that failed, not the software. And a lot of times, if people refuse to change their process after implementing software, then that's where it can also fail again.
100%. So there's this combination of bottom up and top down approach that needs to happen when you implement a technology. When you talk about a tech champion, it's like someone saying, I'm picking that guy up to run with this thing and like create this like first nucleus of experience in our company that you can like build off from. But once you start building off from that, you definitely need that top down support saying we're going to change this process. That's how we're going to do it, guys. Like this is how we're going to do it going forward. And so that's where like you set the expectations on like that other 90% that you're talking about. Like people expect it to do something, or like it doesn't stick because they're like, oh, what's going to happen? So like setting the expectations is how you like, and top down thing, like saying too many things here.
No, it's great because top down is so important. We just talked about like who is the champion, and at no point did we say the champion was the CEO, right? So most of the time, and I would advocate that the champion should not be the CEO because they have a lot of other things going on. But the top down support from the CEO is so important because that champion is a mid-level manager. So no one's going to listen to them. Why? They're a mid-level manager. You know, why should anyone listen to them, or why should anyone respond to them? It absolutely needs to be backed up 100% from the top down in order to really have a successful implementation.
Even if it's like a super viral product that like one account manager tries, the others just like end up picking it up. If you don't end up changing that process, and that will happen top down because the account manager leaves, a new one comes in like, hey, what'd you tell him?
Yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, the top down backing is just, you cannot have the success. And that's not just a CEO saying, oh, I think this is a good idea and listen to the champion. That's not enough. The CEO's responsibility in an implementation is accountability. And that CEO has to hold people accountable to the changes that the champion is trying to make. Because if not, if no one's held accountable to it, we've talked about this before in our other videos, people by human nature are just going to revert back to what is easiest and what is most comfortable.
Yeah, a good point that some of our customers brought up about like accountability because they want to drive it top down. The ask is from the software guy to like help out with the usage report. Okay, I asked 5 guys to use my system. Tell me at the end of 2 weeks like how many are actually using it so that I can like ensure accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the great things about these platforms. Most of them have very detailed reports about usage. Who's creating what? Where are they working in the system? There's a lot of visibility there. So there is a lot of information to support the champion when they go to the top and say, hey, so and so is just not doing what we asked for. I need some help on the accountability. There's data to back that up.
There's this vision that people have about the company, or this is how we operate, right? Like, and in that vision somehow it needs to like fit that we use technology for workflows. So oh, we were just like, let's say, passing off paper maps one day. Now we are not passing off paper maps anymore. We are like using applications to like share mapping data, or we were using stickies on the board to do scheduling. We are not doing that anymore. So like this thing that our company has started to look different now because our process has changed. Like, what is a company? A company is what people like people of the company experience on a day-to-day basis when they're in the office, right? Like, and the shift of that experience, like someone holding that vision in their mind, like our company is changing, sort of like that baselines everyone like, okay, this is what's really happening. Close that loop.
Yep. And it's not easy. I mean, there's lots of statistics and findings out there that say, it takes 3 months to create a new habit, and it takes 3 days to break it and fall back into an old habit. I mean, it's so easy to fall out of new habits. So it does take a lot of dedication to do a good implementation.
True. The software you are picking up, they will know how implementation works, like in different companies. Squeeze them out. Talk to them about what are the challenges people face. Get ready with it before like just saying, oh, I'm going to make this work. You should like benefit from their experience.
That's another great point of, listen, other people have gone through this process before. So use your network and find out what worked for other people when they tried implementation. Reach out to other companies. Hey, what were your pain points, or what were the stumbling blocks when you tried to implement this software? It doesn't even have to be the same software, but if you're solving the same process problem, then it doesn't matter what software you pick. You're going to have probably the same stumbling blocks as somebody else. So reach out and talk to people and really find out, hey, maybe I can get ahead of this. Maybe if I know that my people are going to push back on A, then I can get out in front of that and say, hey, this is going to be difficult, but here's the reason why we're doing it, and here's the light at the end of the tunnel.
Very cool. So I think there were a lot of different things we talked about. It's more like a laundry list that we've just like shared. One of these things would work for you, and like I think some of them can be implemented. Best practices to go through when like trying out new technology. And like one last, sorry, I should probably stop. Like any.
No, it's good.
Okay, all right, cool. And then. Sorry, I realized like it's very important to mention this last thing. Don't fatigue when you're implementing technology because it's gonna be a constant process, man.
That's another great point. It is not a sprint; it is a marathon, and that's why you have a sprint part of the marathon where that first 3 months you're trying to get it, but the real part of the implementation, the marathon part, is the next 2 to 3 years where you have to constantly make small adjustments and continue to remind people that they need to be doing it the new way. And you have to set that up in your mind that it is a long process. It is not a sprint. Excellent point.
And from that, it's like, oh, it's one technology, it's another. It's not going to end, right? Like you run like 9 different verticals in your business. Each of them needs a technology. It's going to be a constant thing. So probably at the end of the day, the organization just needs to develop a muscle memory of taking a software that makes sense for it and implementing it successfully.
And that's muscle memory is another good point. That once you do it a couple of times, then your people will be ready for change, and it'll be a little bit easier after the third implementation that you do.
And hopefully that's with that, we get to a point where all these younger guys coming up, they look at us and they're like, oh yeah, here are some pretty cool companies.
Yep.
Young at heart.
Right.
Young at heart. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening in. Mike, any other point you wanted to make?
No, I think this is just kind of leading into our next talk where we'll talk about process flows and after you've implemented software, how important it is to relook at your processes and to reshape your processes around the whatever software you implemented instead of trying to jam your software into your old process. So that's what we'll be talking about next.
Thank you so much for listening in, folks. Excited to see you next time. Stay healthy, stay cool.
Okay.